President Obama breaking into tears at the White House today, taking executive action. The families there with him wanted it, but many in this country did not. There is now outrage, some calling it overreach. The president wiping away tears as he talked about the youngest of victims, among them the children of Newtown, some of their parents at the White House today. The president's action will bring more background checks amid polling. 85% of Americans support more checks. But there is also that backlash tonight, and we begin with ABC senior justice correspondent Pierre Thomas.
Tonight, the president making headlines for more than his controversial move, but his tears as well.
And from every family who never imagined that their loved one would be taken from our lives by a bullet from a gun. Every time I think about those kids, it gets me mad.
Those children, the victims of Sandy Hook. And behind the president today, families of victims from countless shooting rampages. He remembers them all, and the daily carnage as well.
And by the way, it happens on the streets of Chicago every day.
When the tear was coming down his face, and what did you think when you saw that?
I thought that was authentic. I think he's met his fair share of survivors like us.
But his tears drawing fire too. Today, Mr. Obama taking executive action on his own, narrowing the loophole that allows weapons to be bought without a background check at gun shows and online, hiring more agents to conduct background checks, and asking Congress for $500 million to provide better access to mental health services. But opponents were equally determined. The National Rifle Association issued a statement saying the proposals would not have prevented any of the horrific events he mentioned. And GOP presidential candidates were denouncing the president's actions.
President Obama's executive actions limiting gun rights will restrict our law-abiding citizens.
These orders today, I believe, are not worth the paper they are written on.
If there's an issue related to federal gun laws, then you ought to go to Congress and try to forge consensus to make it happen. You don't have this power.
With many Americans flocking to the gun store after the San Bernardino attacks, the White House said today it would be a dangerous and slippery slope for individual Americans to arm themselves against terrorists. Quote, that's why we have government. And this week, President Obama is expected to outline new executive actions that his administration believes would make it more difficult for the mentally ill, criminals, and terrorists to arm themselves with powerful weapons. The president announcing in his weekly radio address he'll meet with Attorney General Loretta Lynch Monday to decide what he can do on his own without violating the Second Amendment.
We can protect that right while keeping an irresponsible, dangerous few from inflicting harm on a massive scale.
The White House wants to broaden the number of gun dealers who must perform background checks and stop those on the no-fly list from buying guns. Texas Republican Ted Cruz called that lunacy, and Donald Trump condemned the plan.
It's not the gun that pulls the trigger. So I don't like it. I don't like what he's doing.
They're not going to take your guns away, folks. They're not going to take your guns away. Not going to do it. They're trying. They're talking about the bullets. They're talking about, and then as you see, President Obama is on television. Who can blame you? No. Honestly, after what we've gone through for years, who can blame you for that? I mean, who can blame you? But you saw what he did today. Executive orders. He wants to do. Wouldn't it be nice if they could actually get Congress together and, do it the old-fashioned way where people work and they this and they cajole and they have drinks together and they get along or they don't get along and they come up with some. Just wants to sign executive orders all the time.
In the United States, a 150-strong armed militia has occupied a federal building in the state of Oregon. They're calling on other so-called American patriots to join them and stand up against the government in Washington.
Bring your arms, and the point is, until that line is drawn and say we've had enough of this tyranny, you are going to leave us alone. It will not change. And you're going to see this is the power of America right here. People got together for this. It doesn't have to stop here. This could be a hope that spreads through the whole country, the whole United States. Everybody's looking for this hope because the government has beat us and oppressed us and took everything from us. They will not stop until we tell them no.
The militia say they're not ruling out resorting to violence either if police try to remove them from the federal premises.
Well, the American flag is draped over the sign here at the Wildlife Refuge, and that's the protesters' signal that they are in charge here. They're calling on supporters from across the country to come and join them here. They say they'll stay here as long as it takes until their demands are met. At the occupied compound, protesters are setting up camp and settling in for the long haul. Ammon Bundy is leading the occupation. He says they're fighting back against the government's expansion of the over 100-year-old federal wildlife refuge at the expense of local ranchers.
This refuge here is rightfully owned by the people, and we intend to use it.
Back in 2014, Bundy's father, Cliven, was embroiled in a dispute with federal officials over grazing rights on federal land in Nevada. That escalated into an armed confrontation. This group set up camp Saturday after a march in a nearby town in support of two ranchers.
Go Hammond! Yeah!
Dwight Hammond and his son Stephen were convicted of setting fires on federal land in 2001 and served jail time. They say it wasn't arson, but controlled burns to protect their property. In October, a judge added 4 more years to their sentence. 73-year-old Hammond says this could be a death sentence for him.
This makes it over for me. It just seems like a little overreach for having burned 127 acres.
In a statement, the Hammond's attorney reports they're not associated with Bundy's group, saying neither Ammon Bundy nor anyone within his group or organization speak for the Hammond family. But protesters say they plan to stay put until all local ranchers reclaim land they allege was stolen by the U.S. government years ago.
We will be here as long as it takes, and being as gentle as possible, firm as necessary, but this is important.
We're following the latest developments on a deadly attack in southern Afghanistan involving U.S. Special Forces. 1 U.S. service member is dead and 2 others are injured. Forces were involved in a counterterrorism operation in Helmand Province in the town of Marja. National Security and Foreign Affairs correspondent Kemi McCormick is with us now on the phone. Why is this so significant to the United States efforts in that country?
Well, it's very significant at this moment in time because the U.S. is about to start drawing down more forces. The U.S. commander there, General John Campbell, has been watching this very carefully. He's been very concerned about it. I just spoke to him a couple of weeks ago when I was in Afghanistan. He said it has been a very, very tough fighting season for the Afghans. It's been the first fighting season in which they've taken the lead, and the Americans have been in the background. So it's obvious that the Taliban is testing the Afghan security forces, but the Taliban are also sending a message to the U.S. that these attacks are coming. These number of attacks we've seen in Kabul in just the last several days are coming at a time where the U.S. is drawing down its forces. So the U.S. commanders may be rethinking the numbers game here.
The hunt for this masked man from the terror group's latest execution video. Authorities trying to determine the identity of this new Jihadi John, and ABC's chief investigative correspondent Brian Ross here with the details. Good morning, Brian.
Well, good morning, George. U.S. and British authorities today are closely studying this latest ISIS propaganda video, frame by frame, trying to identify the new English-speaking executioner who's now taken the place of a terrorist called Jihadi John, who was killed last year in a U.S. drone strike.
Behind the black mask, the ISIS 2016 version of evil personified, speaking with a British accent.
And we will continue to wage jihad, break borders, and one day invade your land.
Since the release of this 10.5-minute video, which shows the execution of 5 supposed British spies, U.S. and British officials have been analyzing it in detail, looking at the physical build, the eyes, and the speaking voice and accent of the new ISIS executioner, who calls British Prime Minister David Cameron an imbecile.
Only an imbecile would dare to anger a people who love death the way that you love your life.
Among the possible suspects is this well-known British radical, Siddhartha Dar, who fled to Syria and ISIS a year and a half ago.
We are here to call for...
After he and his mentor, the radical London cleric Anjem Choudhury, were arrested by Scotland Yard on charges of supporting terrorism.
The jihad is not, a bad thing.
Dar was interviewed by ABC News correspondent Lama Hassan in 2014 as he urged young Muslim men in London to push for Sharia law.
I think that will be the beginning of the end of the United States of America, of Britain, of Europe, and the entire world.
A side-by-side comparison of Dar and the new ISIS executioner is far from conclusive. His family says it's not sure it's him. Some reporters who have interviewed Dar say it is him, and others say it is not. But one person in the video who has been identified by his family is this young English-speaking boy, who ISIS shamelessly uses to call for the killing of disbelievers.
A London cab driver has now told British reporters that young boy is his grandson, the child of his daughter who went to Syria to marry an ISIS fighter and has used the little boy repeatedly in social media propaganda on behalf of ISIS.
A university in the U.S. state of Illinois is planning to fire a professor after she expressed solidarity with Muslims in a post on social media. Dr. Larecia Hawkins wrote that Muslims and Christians worship the same God. She posted pictures of herself wearing hijab and said this is a gesture to show solidarity with Muslim people. Her comments drew criticism, and Wheaton College placed her under administrative leave. The college board will make the final decision about Hawkins after a hearing with faculty committee and other reviews. Hawkins said the solidarity gesture comes as Muslims around the U.S. report concerns over growing Islamophobia in the country.
Incidents of hate crimes against Muslims in London have almost doubled since 2013, according to the police. They say they've spiked since November's Paris massacres. More than 100 incidents were reported in a fortnight following the attacks, and almost 150 last month. Well, campaigners say that the Muslim community is now feeling an ever greater sense of fear, with many women removing their headscarves and men shaving off their beards in order to hide their faith. A report by London's police shows that apart from the physical violence, assailants often bully Muslims, also abuse them verbally, send them hate messages, and cause damage to their property. Islamophobia is also on the rise across the whole of the UK, as RT's Anastasia Churkina now reports.
Sadly, Islamophobia is nothing new, with episodes like this in broad daylight becoming way too common in the UK.
She didn't even be in this country. They left the other weapon invasion.
There's been a sharp rise in the frequency that Muslims are being harassed after the terror attacks in Paris. The community, as well as its places of worship, are faced with a major spike in hatred, fear, and suspicion. According to a report by UK-based organization tracking incidents involving the Muslim community, Islamophobic attacks in the country have tripled after the tragic events in Paris, up by a staggering 275%.
Dozens of migrants have been killed off the coast of Turkey as they tried to make the perilous journey across the sea to Greece. Some reports say, and this number is staggering, at least 34 bodies were found at 2 sites along the Aegean coast. Linda Kincaid has more.
It's an all-too-familiar scene along Turkey's coastline, the bodies of migrants washing up along the shore. Here on the Aegean coast, rescuers removed the bodies of at least 24 migrants, including 3 children, after several boats capsized while trying to reach the Greek island of Lesbos. The International Organization for Migration says 2015 was the deadliest year on record for migrants and refugees trying to reach Europe by sea. 3,771 people lost their lives crossing the Mediterranean, nearly 500 more than last year. Migration officials warn that poor weather conditions are not stopping the flow of migrants.
Migrants and refugees continue to enter Greece at a rate of over 2,500 a day from Turkey, which is very close to the average through December. So we see the migrant flows are continuing through the winter, and obviously the fatalities are continuing as well.
Happening at the Saudi embassy in Tehran, which has been pelted with Molotov cocktails in response to Saudi Arabia's execution of a prominent Shia cleric. Sheikh Nimr al-Nimr was executed along with 46 others on Saturday. They were accused of plotting and committing foreign and domestic terror attacks. Angry mobs also attacked the Saudi consulate in the Iranian city of Mashhad, throwing petrol bombs at the compound. Iran, as the leading Shia Muslim power in the region, has a long history of disputes with Saudi Arabia, which is led by a hardline Sunni monarchy. Governments have accused each other of supporting terrorism, and some of those allegations relate to the Syrian conflict, where the countries back opposing sides. Saudi Arabia is a close US ally, whereas Iran has strongly opposed Washington's influence since the 1979 revolution there. Both states are major oil producers, but both have conflicting strategies within OPEC. The killing of al-Nimr has also stirred anger in other Shia communities. Prominent Shia Muslims in Iraq have lashed out at Saudi Arabia and called the execution a service to Islamic State and warned that it's opened the gates of hell. In Lebanon, the execution was labelled a grave mistake. Experts we spoke to say the killing of al-Nimr is a warning of the growing rift between Shia and Sunni Muslims across the region.
The execution of Sheikh al-Nimr definitely is going to incite more sectarianism in the region, and will definitely make the situation worse in different places, not just in Saudi Arabia. And so this is one of the reasons why so many people were calling out the Saudi government and demanding that he not be executed.
A death penalty carried out against him is clearly an effort to stoke sectarian tensions between Shias and Sunnis throughout the region. So this is clearly going to foster instability in the Middle East, throughout the entire Muslim world.
The US State Department also weighed in, warning its close ally Saudi Arabia against escalating sectarian division.
The execution of prominent Shia cleric and political activist Nimr al-Nimr risks exacerbating sectarian tensions at a time when they urgently need to be reduced.
We know that these two countries have had their diplomatic rifts before. In your experience, how serious is this? Where does this stack up among all their other disputes?
Well, it's not at the top, but I think it's something we need to continue to monitor very closely. You know, seemingly innocuous events can sometimes come unhinged through misplaying one's hand, through overplaying one's hand. We saw this at the beginning of World War I with the Zimmerman telegram and the assassination of the Archduke Ferdinand. So I think we've got to keep an eye on this and be sure that neither side overplays their hand.
Well, Iran's Islamic Revolution Guard Corps unveils its second underground missile facility. The footage was released following a visit by Parliament Speaker Ali Larijani to the site. The missile depot contains different projectiles, including long-range ballistic missile Imad, as well as mobile launchers. Imad is the first Iranian missile that can be guided and controlled until it hits the target. It was test-fired in October. Iran also unveiled its first secret missile facility in October. IRGC top commanders say Iran has numerous such sites scattered across the country. Tehran has said it would spare no effort to boost its defensive missile capabilities.
Crude prices moved up in the morning section amid fears that the flare-up of the tension could disrupt oil production and shipments from the Middle East. But early price gains fizzled as traders returned to focus on the prolonged global supply glut. And Saudi Arabia is the world's biggest oil exporter, and Iran is preparing to ramp up exports following an expected lifting of sanctions under the July nuclear deal. An energy futures specialist, Tim Evans, pointed out that the Saudi-Iran tension makes it somewhat more difficult for OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, to reach an agreement that could limit supplies.
Wall Street futures predict more losses this morning after a sell-off to start the new year. The Dow Jones Industrials fell as much as 467 points on Monday. The index finished the day with a 276-point loss, down 1.6%. It was the worst start to a year since the Great Recession of 2008. CBS News business analyst Joel Schlesinger joins us now. Good morning.
Good morning.
So what's behind all this?
Well, the selling started yesterday morning in China. The index there down 7% in one session. That came after a weak manufacturing reading there. This got everybody really nervous because they were worried that China's growth is slowing down, the world's growth is slowing down. Not good for stocks anywhere. Selling was broad-based. Japan, Europe, here in the U.S. as well.
What's the likelihood that China is going to continue to drag down the world's economies?
I think this is the critical question of the year. China is trying to move from a different kind of economy. They had an economy that was based on manufacturing and government investment. That was the big spending. They're trying to move to a consumer-based economy. That's a tough transition. A decade ago, Chinese economy would grow by double digits. I will also remind everyone, we're now 4 times as large as they were back 10 years ago. So they're going to slow down. Whether that rate is at 5% or 6 or 7, we just don't know. It will be the story of 2016.
And tension in the Middle East, certainly because of its connection to oil prices.
Exactly. Obviously, when they cut off relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran, this escalated things. I think.
Well, Israeli forces have launched rockets into southern Lebanon, targeting residential areas in the Marjioun region. Lebanese media say Israel used the internationally banned cluster bombs in the assaults. Earlier in the day, fighters from Lebanon's resistance movement Hezbollah hit Israeli forces in Lebanon's southern region of Sheba Farms. The Lebanese forces destroyed a military vehicle and injured a number of Israeli troops.
The road on which the explosive devices were planted by Hezbollah fighters just before the explosion, this road was inspected by the Israelis, and the Israelis had assumed that it was a safe passage, and hence allowed the Israeli military vehicles to go by on it. So there were 2 vehicles, as I said, transporting Israeli soldiers. One of the 2 vehicles did have an Israeli general inside it. It was transporting an Israeli general. What is not clear, the Hezbollah official even said it's not clear to Hezbollah yet whether or not the vehicle which exploded is that which was transporting the Israeli general, or whether he was in the other vehicle which did not explode. Despite the fact that they've been expecting Hezbollah's retaliation since the assassination of Samir Qantar, despite all the precautionary measures and the fact that they expected it, regardless, Hezbollah was able to penetrate the Israeli precautionary measures and carry out this attack.
لا
تحت بس قبل الوزاني بشوي وجيت الغزايف حدنا اجوا 4-5 غزايف حدنا.
Breaking news overnight. North Korea claims that it's detonated a hydrogen bomb. If true, this would be a major breakthrough for the rogue state. It's already ratcheting up tension around the world. The UN Security Council calling an emergency meeting this morning, and ABC's chief global affairs correspondent Martha Raddatz starts us off. Good morning, Martha.
Good morning, George. The U.S. immediately launched so-called nuclear sniffer planes to try to determine whether or not North Korea's claims are true, but it could be weeks, if not longer, before we know for certain. The announcement came from North Korean state media, claiming that the tremors, which caused a 5.1 magnitude earthquake in the northeast part of the country, were the result of North Korea's first successful test of a hydrogen bomb. Those are far more sophisticated and about 1,000 times more powerful than atomic bombs like those dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in World War II. There has been no confirmation and lots of skepticism, but it raises immediate concern about North Korea's nuclear program, earning condemnation from countries around the world, including North Korea's friend, China. This would be the country's 4th time testing a nuclear weapon since 2006, but it would be the first time testing a thermonuclear weapon. There is, as we noted, a lot of skepticism as to whether this was a hydrogen bomb because the initial size and scale of the tremor is similar to tests in the past. But, George, no one wants to rule it out just yet.
Not at all. And the North Koreans saying a miniaturized hydrogen bomb. But, you've seen that condemnation. You talked about that right there. But what can the world do about this?
Well, North Korea is already so heavily sanctioned, it's hard to see what else they can do. And the bottom line is that if this is a hydrogen bomb or any kind of nuclear test, those sanctions and the condemnation clearly have not worked, George.
The DPRK has conducted 4 nuclear tests. Now let's take a look at its previous 3 tests in 2006. On October the 9th, 2006, the DPRK announced it had successfully conducted an underground nuclear test. The country said it was facing an extreme threat of a nuclear war from the United States. Many observers thought the test was for political purposes, as leaders of the DPRK and South Korea were holding talks, and the South Korean Ban Ki-moon was named UN Secretary General. Some analysts also believed the DPRK wanted to push the US back to negotiations and lift economic sanctions on the country. Some experts have said the DPRK's other underground nuclear test on May 25, 2009 was to bring its people together to push forward domestic reform. On February 12, 2013, the DPRK conducted its 3rd nuclear test after the UN approved a resolution condemning a rocket launch. Pyongyang said the test was an act of self-defense against US hostility.
Wall Street doesn't like shocks, but 2016 is just 3 days old and the stock market has been hit by 2 big shocks already. The latest, North Korea's claim that it successfully tested a mega-powerful nuclear weapon. Hi, I'm Adam Schell, and this is America's Markets. Stock gurus always cite geopolitics as a risk, but the warning always comes with a caveat. Shocks are hard to predict. The fact is, shocks come out of the blue, and that spooks investors. And shocks are unnerving. They make stocks seem more risky. Shocks can change the investment calculus if it hurts economic activity, if it hurts investor confidence, and if it turns out to be a real game changer. News of an H-bomb test gets investors' attention. Talk of H-bombs or A-bombs can cause a great deal of angst as people think the worst. The North Korean nuke shock also comes at a bad time for Wall Street, which is off to a lousy start this year and is in a fragile state. The H-bomb shock comes on the heels of the big shock on the first day of trading this year, when China's stock market plunged 7% and Chinese manufacturing data showed contraction for a 10th straight month, revving up all sorts of worries about the health of the global economy. Rising tensions between Saudi Arabia and Iran can be dubbed a shock as well. No doubt, shocks spook markets. But it is important to note that the market has survived all sorts of shocks: wars, natural disasters, market crashes, terrorism, even the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. In fact, a look at more than a dozen market shocks since World War II found that the U.S. stock market falls a little more than 2% the day a shock strikes. Data from Sam Stovall, the U.S. equity strategist at S&P Capital IQ show. And shocks tend to be short-lived. The market has hit bottom 8 days later on average, falling about 5.2%. The good news, it has taken an average of 14 days for their stocks to recover their losses.
Test of weaponry and intelligence. Elite soldiers were split into a red team and his permanent enemy, the blue team. The blues were a specialized IT troop that posed trouble through electromagnetic waves. The upcoming airstrikes were a chance for the red team to practice in emergency response and defense. Meanwhile, in a desert thousands of kilometers away, dozens of missiles were ready for collective launch. Each unit had to finish the job independently, within the set time, regardless of the weather.
Soldiers need to have the capability of striking and launching missiles independently. The combat capability calls for more practice.
In its annual plan, the Rocket Force will focus on a collective launch of various types of missile and test China's ability to win a war using information technology.
The Rocket Force will develop new ways of strategic thinking and establish standards and goals that live up to its name. It is also part of the modernization of the Army.
The Rocket Force, formerly China's Second Artillery Force, is the PLA's strategic deterrent, and it will run in parallel with the nation's land, navy, and air forces. It was only part of the reform process the Army is currently going through.
The quake hit about 30 kilometers west of Impal, capital of India's Manipur state. Local reports said the quake killed at least 8 people in India and 5 in neighboring Bangladesh. Shock waves are felt in Nepal and as far away as the city of Yangon in Myanmar. Walls, staircases, and roofs of some buildings collapsed in Impal, and power and telecoms links were down in the remote region. The government said 2 teams from the National Disaster Response Force are helping with the rescue efforts.
El Nino is threatening parts of the West this morning with more dangerous weather. Heavy rain and high winds will take aim at California. Today's storm is the second in a series of systems. 6 inches of rain could fall by Friday. Some drivers around Los Angeles had to ditch their flooded cars, and there is damage from a reported tornado nearby. Ben Tracy is next to the Los Angeles River. Ben, good morning.
Good morning. We're expecting the rain to start falling here in Los Angeles in about 2 hours as more storms move through. But take a look at this. This is the LA River, which yesterday rose by about 10 feet, has now dropped all the way back down. But as that rain starts falling, we are expecting the river to once again start rising. The Los Angeles River was rushing with rapids. Water levels rose from less than an inch deep Tuesday morning to several feet by midday. Overnight in San Diego, lifeguards rescued 2 homeless men stranded in the rising San Diego River.
We were hitting logs and debris in the current. At one point, we got swept in the current down with them, and we got spun around.
As much as 3 inches of rain fell across parts of Southern California Tuesday, snarling traffic on muddy roadways and sending stranded drivers scrambling for safety.
I saw cars going through it, so I thought, oh, I'm fine, until I felt my car slightly lift off, and I just felt all the water, and then I was like, I can't move.
A strong gust front in LA County damaged roofs and blew out windows in at least 8 commercial buildings. The strong winds downed power lines and sent debris crashing into windshields. In parts of Southern California that were only recently fighting droughts and wildfire, the heavy rain is now threatening dangerous mudslides. Ed Heinlein has constructed retaining walls around his home, but that may not be enough.
Likelihood is the house will be shoved into the street and the county will be coming out to pick it up.
In the Sierra Nevada mountains, snow is the concern. As much as 2 feet is forecast to fall today, but that's not stopping truckers from plowing through.
Pretty much not happy campers doing this, but we've got to do it just to get the freight on the other side.
Extreme weather this morning continues to hit the United States. We showed you earlier the flooding overwhelming the Midwest, and an Arctic blast is finally chilling the Northeast, and California is preparing for a series of drenching storms. Heavy rain is already falling this morning outside San Francisco. Jeffrey Kluger is editor-at-large for Time Magazine and Time.com. He oversees coverage of science and human behavior. Jeffrey, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
So what is going on with all this weather?
Well, here's what's happening. We're already coming off of what's the hottest year on record, 2015, and the hottest month in the hottest year was July. So think of the Earth as running a chronic fever. Now, on top of that chronic fever comes the acute fever of El Nino, which occurs when westerly winds that usually push warm Pacific water over to the west side of the Pacific weaken or reverse, allowing that warm water to slosh back east. That tends to heat up the North American hemisphere.
We're talking about El Nino because NASA says that satellite images show that this year's El Nino could rival the one of 1997, 1998 that killed 23,000 people worldwide. So what does that mean for us? It means the big snow that we're having in the Midwest. What else will it mean?
Well, it means the big snow we're having in the Midwest. It means the droughts we're seeing in Central America, which are imperiling 3.9 million people with food insecurity and 10.2 million people across Africa with food insecurity.
Wow.
We're also seeing the images you showed earlier this morning of the flooding across the Mississippi. We're going to see extreme heat spikes over the summer, which will affect vulnerable populations, older people, sickly people, very young people. So this could take a much bigger toll than the one in 1993.
Well, it was in the 70s on the East Coast for Christmas. It's the North Pole is 50 degrees higher, they say. So is this a new normal?
Well, this is a new normal, and the problem, I'm glad you brought up the North Pole, because what happens when the pole gets above freezing is that obviously the Arctic ice cap shrinks. Well, ice caps reflect sunlight back into space, but the smaller the Arctic ice cap gets, the more warmth that the dark waters can absorb. So you get sort of a dangerous feedback.
This is where they gather every Sunday, and this is where they gathered New Year's Eve to celebrate God and a new year. Just before midnight, a man walked in, the first to see him, the pastor.
I asked him, can we help you? Can I help you?
I didn't see anything else but this big rifle.
His next words were, can you pray for me?
Charleston was the first thing that went through my mind. Then the man went up there to the altar. He put the gun up there.
Let the church say amen.
Days later, the congregation is still giving thanks. And just when we started to talk to the pastor about security in the church today,
you know, and security is the piece that we need. There's the young man now. Let him in. Yeah. Hey, what's going on? That's a young man right there. How you doing, man? Hallelujah. You all right? All right.
The very man responsible for the scare returns, this time to apologize. He asked us not to identify him. He is not facing charges.
What was going on in your mind?
He tells him his wife was just diagnosed with a debilitating disease. They're struggling financially. The power was just cut off at home. And on top of that, this veteran explains he is struggling with PTSD, partly because he cannot afford the medication.
And I saw in his eyes, you know, hopelessness. I saw hurt, pain, despair.
He also admitted he's a convicted felon who was given a gun. He says he came to the church because he thought it would be a safe place to get rid of the gun and not get into trouble. He never meant any harm. In fact, on this Sunday, after saying thank you and asking for forgiveness, he asks if the congregation would allow him to be part of the Heal the Land outreach ministries.
And I pray that he comes back to visit us. I'm not scared of him. Not now.
Man, you in.
Because this congregation believes the night they opened the door to this very troubled man, they opened the door to God.